Good evening, dreamer, and welcome to the Middle Ages. Close your eyes and forget everything you've seen in Hollywood films. No shining armor, no perfectly clean maidens, and absolutely no indoor plumbing. That's for later. You are a peasant. A simple serf. You don't own the land you stand on, the clothes on your back, or perhaps even the life you lead. That all belongs to the local lord. But we'll get to the feudal contracts later. First, let's talk about your most immediate sensory experience, the smell. It hits you the moment you step out of your hovel. Imagine the concentrated essence of 1,000 unshowered people who haven't changed their wool tunic in 6 months, mixed with stale beer, untreated sewage, and a generous layer of animal feces. Congratulations, you've arrived in Paris, London, or any bustling medieval town. The city streets are not paved with gold, dear. They are paved with centuries of trash. The streets are essentially open sores. People toss everything out the window: human waste, kitchen scraps, dead animals. This is why medieval architecture has those lovely little overhangs on the upper floors, to make sure most of the debris falls onto the street, not onto the first floor windows. Though if you are walking underneath when someone empties their chamber pot, well, that's just bad luck. In fact, French law eventually stipulated that before throwing waste out the window, you had to shout "Gare l'eau." Look out for the water. A lovely social contract, isn't it? And the animals. They are everywhere. Pigs, goats, chickens, they wander freely, acting as the city's unofficial garbage disposal system. They eat the refuse, they deposit more refuse, and then, if you're lucky, they become dinner. It's a beautifully simple, if utterly disgusting, ecosystem. You're thinking, surely they must bathe. Oh, you poor, misled modern soul. The general belief, starting around the 14th century, was that hot water opened your pores, allowing miasma, remember that from the Victorian script? Bad air and disease to enter your body. So, bathing was considered risky, immoral, and utterly unnecessary, especially for the common person. If you did bathe, it was likely in a public bathhouse, but by the time of the plague, those were often seen as places of sin and disease, so they were quickly shut down. You mostly just wiped yourself down with a dry cloth and maybe some fragrant herbs if you could afford them. The wealthy. They wore heavy perfumes, not to smell good, but to smell less bad. That's the difference. Your clothes, made of heavy wool, are almost never washed. You wear them until they literally rot off your back. The main enemies here are fleas and lice. They are constant companions, an accepted part of your existence. Scratching yourself in public isn't rude, it's just a lifestyle. So, let's establish the baseline for life in the Middle Ages. You smell, your clothes crawl, and the ground beneath your feet is a biological time capsule of filth. Now that you're thoroughly marinated in your own grime, let's find you a place to sleep. Forget the grand stone castles. You are not royalty, remember? Your home is a cotter's dwelling. It's a single, windowless room, or perhaps one tiny slit covered in oiled paper, if you're feeling fancy. It's built from wattle and daub, woven sticks coated in mud and animal dung. This construction is cheap, effective, and incredibly flammable. The roof is thatched with straw. A lovely touch, but it's also home to every insect, rodent, and stray bird looking for a cozy spot. Oh, and it leaks, constantly. Inside, there is no furniture. No tables, no chairs, just a hard-packed dirt floor, which you share with the livestock. Yes, the chickens, the pigs, and perhaps the family cow, they all sleep inside with you. Why? Because livestock is wealth, and keeping them close protects them from thieves, wolves, and the cold. Plus, Their body heat helps warm the cottage in the winter. It's a multifunctional cohabitation arrangement, where the main function is warmth and the main result is more filth. You're hungry, constantly. Your diet is monotonous and heavy on carbohydrates. Meat is a rarity. That belongs to the Lord. You survive on pottage, a thick, watery stew made from whatever is available: beans, peas, cabbage, and sometimes oats. It simmers over the fire all day, every day. It's bland, it's boring, and it's the primary source of your caloric intake. The bread. It's dark, heavy, and often mixed with rye or barley. You dip it in the pottage to soften it up. It also usually contains grit or stones from the grinding process, which gradually destroys your teeth. By the time you're 30, your teeth are ground down to stumps, making every meal a painful endurance test. You exist in this filthy paradise, and you believe you are free, don't you? Silly peasant. Freedom is an expensive luxury, and you, my dear, are property. You are bound to the land you work by the laws of feudalism. The lord of the manor owns the mill where you grind your grain, the oven where you bake your bread, and the very soil beneath your feet. You are born, you work, and you die, all for the benefit of your lord. And you pay for the privilege of your miserable existence. You pay in tithes, a tenth of everything you produce to the church, and you pay in tallage, a tax the Lord demands whenever he feels like it. You also pay with your time, dedicating several days a week to working the Lord's land before you can even touch your own strip. This system is absolute. The Lord is the law. If he desires your pig, he takes it. If he desires your daughter's hand in marriage, you bow and accept. Now, let's say you're accused of stealing that very pig your Lord just took. You didn't do it, but who cares? You have no lawyers, no evidence, and certainly no fair jury of your peers, because you have no peers. Everyone is dirt. Your justice system is delightful. It's the trial by ordeal. Do you think they examine the evidence? No. They turn the judgment over to God, because God, supposedly, would never let an innocent person suffer too much. The most popular option. The ordeal of hot iron. You must carry a red-hot iron bar for a specific distance, usually 3 to 9 feet. Your hand is then bandaged. 3 days later, the priest inspects it. If the wound is healing cleanly and quickly, God has declared you innocent. If the wound is festering and horribly infected, which, in the Middle Ages, is guaranteed, you are guilty and immediately punished. It's genius, really, a system designed to ensure everyone is guilty, regardless of the crime. Or perhaps you face the ordeal of cold water. If you are accused of witchcraft, they tie your limbs and throw you into consecrated water. If you sink, the water has accepted you, and you are innocent, but dead, or nearly so. If you float, the water has rejected you as a witch, and you are immediately hauled out for execution. It's a lose-lose scenario, unless you're very, very good at holding your breath for a very, very long time. And the punishment for being found guilty? It's swift and brutal. Theft might cost you an ear or a hand, to clearly mark you as a criminal. Speaking poorly of the Lord might earn you a session in the stocks, where you are left exposed to the elements and the hurled refuse of the town, more feces, more urine. Your humiliation is the Lord's entertainment. It's a beautifully simple, terrifyingly unfair system. You must simply rely on divine intervention, which, statistically, is not on your side. You've survived the justice system, but you haven't survived the inevitability of medieval health. You are constantly fighting low-level diseases, constant toothaches from the grit in the bread, dysentery from the water, and fevers from the rat and insect infestations in your home. When you fall truly ill, you don't go to a doctor, because doctors are few, expensive, and useless. You go to the local barber surgeon or the wise woman. Their understanding of the human body is based on humoral theory, an idea that originated with the Greeks. They believe your body is governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Sickness is merely an imbalance in these fluids. So, what is the treatment for everything? Bloodletting. If you have a fever, too much blood. If you have a headache, too much blood. If you have a broken leg, too much blood. The barber surgeon attaches leeches or makes deep cuts with a knife. This only weakens you further, increasing the chances of infection, but everyone agrees it must be done. They also prescribe ridiculous treatments. If you have a cough, they might suggest wrapping a raw herring around your neck. If you have a wound, they'll pack it with cobwebs or, even better, moldy bread, not realizing that you are literally applying penicillin if you are lucky, or just festering filth if you are not. The real cure is God's will, or pure dumb luck. But let's fast forward to the year 1347. You suddenly feel very, very cold. Then very, very hot. Your body begins to ache. You've heard whispers from the Italian ports about a disease, a great pestilence carried by the ships. You look around at the filth, the rats, the flies, and the unwashed masses, and you realize this city wasn't just ready for a plague, it was a perfect incubation chamber. When the Black Death arrives, it is not a surprise. It is an inevitability. The initial sign: the buboes, huge, black, painful swellings in your groin, armpits, and neck. They look like giant, festering eggs. Then the fever, the vomiting, the delirium. You die quickly, often within 3 to 5 days. And the doctors. The most famous visual of the era is the plague doctor, wearing that iconic, terrifying leather mask with the long, bird-like beak. They didn't wear it for protection. They wore it because they stuffed the beak with fragrant herbs and spices like lavender, mint, and cloves to filter out the miasma, the bad air, that they believed was causing the disease. They were literally treating the smell, not the source. Their only useful tool was the long stick they carried, used to prod and examine the infected without having to touch them. You now live in the age of indiscriminate, sudden death. The lord, the peasant, the priest, the Black Death doesn't care about your social contract. It kills 25 to 50% of the population. 1 in 3 people you know will be dead within months. And all you can do is pray, bleed, and wait for the buboes to appear. And water. Never drink the water. You wouldn't risk it, even if you were dying of thirst. The local stream is where you wash your meager clothes, where the animals drink, and where the whole village discharges its waste. So, what do you drink? Beer. Weak, thin ale. It's brewed using boiled water, making it a safer and healthier option than the local well. Everyone drinks it, men, women, and even the children. You consume a half-gallon of this thin, nutritional sludge daily. So, you live in a perpetually damp, smoky, crowded hut, constantly sharing space with farm animals and insects, surviving on a bland diet that slowly grinds down your teeth. And remember, you must pay the Lord for the privilege of existing in this paradise. So, your life is short, brutish, and filled with fleas and feces. You're guaranteed to die from a strange imbalance of bile, and your teeth are already gone. Where do you find hope? You find it in the only organization larger and more powerful than your Lord, Holy Mother Church. The Church owned 1/3 of all the land in Europe, yet its true power lay not in property, but in the absolute monopoly it held over your immortal soul. Your existence here is meaningless, dear. It is just a brief, painful test. The real estate you should worry about is heaven or hell. And believe me, they made hell sound absolutely spectacular. The sermons weren't about gentle forgiveness, they were vivid, terrifying performances designed to ensure your obedience through utter psychological terror. You were taught that failure to pay your tithes, questioning the priest, or even harboring a lustful thought would land you in a pit of eternal fire, where demons with pitchforks would personally flay the skin from your bones. But fear is tiring, and salvation, conveniently, is purchasable. If you couldn't make it up to God through good deeds, which, let's face it, is hard when you're busy crushing stones, you could buy an indulgence. An indulgence was a piece of paper, signed and sealed, guaranteeing that your dead grandmother would shave a few thousand years off her time suffering in purgatory. Think of it as a divine get-out-of-jail-free card. And they were expensive. The church had perfected the art of monetising anxiety. They created the disease, fear of hell, and then sold the cure, the expensive paper. The church's wealth was astronomical, built on this fear. While you struggle to find a single clean penny, your local monastery is building magnificent stained glass windows and gold altars, funded by the pennies you sacrificed out of terror. And if you lacked the money for an indulgence, you could always seek healing and grace from a holy relic. The relic trade was a sprawling, unregulated market of sheer, glorious nonsense. Every major church claimed to possess a piece of a saint's bone, a vial of the Virgin Mary's breast milk, or even a piece of the true cross. If you visited the relic and paid a small fee, you might just be granted a miracle. Of course, if you did a bit of basic inventory, you'd quickly discover there were enough pieces of the true cross floating around Europe to build 3 ships, and enough heads of John the Baptist to staff a small football team. But you, the peasant, don't ask questions. You just believe, you just pay, and you just pray that the fragment of St. George's supposedly authentic fingernail will keep the Black Death from returning. The church holds the keys to heaven, and they are quite happy to rent them out to you by the minute. Just when you thought life couldn't get worse, your body is failing, your soul is mortgaged, here comes a new plague, war. Forget the glorious images of knights in shining armor riding off to chivalrous battle. War, from your perspective, is simply a traveling natural disaster. It doesn't matter who is fighting whom, the King of France against the King of England, or one disgruntled duke against another, the outcome for you is always the same: total devastation. The professional army, as we know it, barely exists. Instead, armies are often comprised of mercenaries and bands of unpaid, undisciplined men whose primary function is to live off the land. And your land, dear peasant, is where they live. When a host of soldiers marches through your small village, they don't stop to ask permission. They don't pay for supplies. They simply take. They will steal your pigs, the same pig you slept next to all winter for warmth. They will drink all your precious, boiled ale, and they will burn your meager crops out of spite or necessity. If your little wattle and daub cottage has anything of value, they will destroy it looking for it. Your existence is based entirely on the surplus you manage to hide from the Lord's tax collector. Now you must hide it from an invading army that might literally torture you for a few pence. The worst part: it doesn't matter which side they are on. The friendly army passing through is just as likely to ravage your town as the enemy forces. They are simply hungry men with weapons and no law to govern them. If you live in a town with stone walls, you might think you are safe. Wrong. That just means you are about to endure a siege. A siege is medieval warfare at its most brutal for the civilian. The enemy surrounds your walls and simply waits. The city's supplies quickly run out. Prices skyrocket. People begin eating rats, then dogs, then maybe even their own boots, boiled repeatedly to soften the leather. Disease, already rampant, explodes as sanitation breaks down completely. And if the city falls, the horrors of the battlefield are brought inside the walls. Looting, systematic destruction, and mass violence are the accepted wages for the victorious soldiers. The siege doesn't just kill you, it systematically reduces you to eating garbage and watching your society collapse before the gates are breached. So, in the Middle Ages, war isn't a patriotic defense. It's just another random, violent visitation. Like the plague, like the famine, and like the Lord's tax collector, it's just an inevitable part of the scenery. Dear dreamer, so far we've discussed your clothes, your food, and the rats you share a bed with. Now, let's talk about your greatest existential threat, being a woman. If you are a woman in the Middle Ages, your existence is legally defined by the men around you. You are the property of your father until you become the property of your husband. You have no legal identity, you cannot own land, sue in court, or make any significant decisions without male consent. Your life is defined by two things, labor and reproduction. From the moment you are old enough, your workload is ceaseless. You manage the chickens, you milk the cow, the one that sleeps in the hut, you maintain the small garden, you cook the pottage, you spin the wool, you weave the cloth, and, crucially, you are the local brewer of that weak ale that keeps everyone safe from the water. You are the engine of the household, expected to produce food and babies until you drop. But the single most dangerous event in your entire medieval existence is childbirth. Forget the plague for a moment. This is your personal guillotine. There is no such thing as sanitary conditions. The midwife, who is often the village elder, not a trained medical professional, performs the delivery in your damp, smoky hut, surrounded by animals and filth. Infection is virtually guaranteed. Puerperal fever, childbed fever, is rampant. The chances of the mother dying during or immediately after delivery are astronomically high. 1 in 5, perhaps even higher in some areas. And if you survive, the chance of the infant surviving its first year is barely 50-50. If you have 8 children, you might be lucky to raise 4. The loss is so common that it breeds a strange, necessary emotional detachment. You cannot afford to grieve every time a small life is swallowed by the earth. If you are unlucky enough to be widowed, you regain some legal autonomy, a brief, terrifying moment of freedom. But without a man to work the heavy plough and protect your small land, you are highly vulnerable to the Lord's excessive taxation and the whims of wandering men. For a medieval woman, life is a constant tightrope walk between absolute control and utter destruction. There is no comfortable middle ground. And what about the children? In your modern mind, childhood evokes images of toys, school, and innocence. In the Middle Ages, childhood is a grace period, not a status. As mentioned, infant mortality is horrific. Once a child survives past age 5, they are no longer seen as a vulnerable baby but as a future laborer. They do not go to school. Formal education is reserved for the clergy and the highest nobility. Your education is practical. You learn how to plough, how to spin wool, how to forage, and how to stay quiet when the Lord rides by. Child labor begins at age 5 or 7. Children are given essential tasks immediately, gathering firewood, herding animals, spinning thread, or chasing birds away from the crops. By the time they hit their teens, they are expected to be working full adult shifts, breaking their backs for the Lord alongside their parents. Their short lives are utterly defined by toil. So, after a long day of back-breaking labor, what does the medieval peasant do for fun? They certainly don't have Netflix. Their entertainment is communal, crude, and often violent. Public gatherings are common. Feast days are celebrated with massive amounts of ale and simple dancing. But the real spectacle comes from public cruelty. Bear baiting, dogfighting, or even simple brawls are common, cheap entertainment. The most popular and free show in town? The public execution. If someone is found guilty of a serious crime, the entire village gathers to watch the hanging, the burning, or the drawing and quartering. This wasn't just punishment, it was a holiday spectacle designed to reinforce the Lord's power and scare the populace into obedience. Children are often given the best view, and if you're looking for a simple game, you might play basic dice games, or perhaps wrestling. But even your fun is governed by the harsh realities of your environment. There is no real innocence here. There is only work, fear, and the occasional, brutal spectacle to distract you from the certainty of a premature death. You've endured the filth, the famine, and the fear of the buboes. You survived, somehow. Now, you've decided you can't take the Lord's absolute tyranny anymore. You are going to escape. You are going to travel to the next town, find a new lord, and become a free man, or at least a slightly less enslaved man. You are about to learn why peasants rarely left the boundaries of their small manor. The roads are a suicide pact. Forget the magnificent, straight, paved roads of the Roman Empire. Those fell into ruin 1,000 years ago. Medieval roads are winding, muddy, rutted tracks, often impassable during heavy rain. They are choked with potholes, littered with debris, and deliberately made difficult to travel, since efficient transport was not a priority. A journey of 50 miles could take a week, assuming you don't break an axle or get bogged down in the mire. If the road doesn't kill you, the people will. There is no such thing as organized state police. Law enforcement stops at the edge of the Lord's domain. The vast spaces in between are filled with outlaws, highwaymen, and desperate vagabonds. These aren't romantic Robin Hood figures, they are starving, brutalized men who view a lone traveler, even a poor one like you, as a walking supply depot. They will take your money, if you have any, your boots, your coat, and if they're feeling particularly cruel, they will leave you naked in a ditch for the wild animals. Traveling alone is suicidal. You must hire guards or join a massive caravan, both of which are ruinously expensive. Eventually, exhausted and paranoid, you reach a town and seek refuge in an inn, hoping for a clean bed and a warm meal. You are, of course, terribly mistaken. The medieval inn is a sensory assault. It is loud, reeking of stale ale and human sweat, and the air is thick with smoke from the central hearth. The food is questionable, often watered-down pottage and bread that's been sitting out for weeks. And the sleeping arrangements. There are no private rooms. You pay for a space on a communal mattress, which is usually just a pile of straw and sacking shared with 4, 5, or 6 other travelers. You will be sleeping next to a loud, possibly drunk merchant, a surly soldier, and a host of lice and fleas that are currently migrating from his woolen cloak onto yours. You are paying for the privilege of sharing your sleeping space with strangers, their body odors, and their contagious diseases. If you manage to wake up with all your belongings, without a new rash, and without being murdered in the night, you have had a successful stay. You are better off sleeping next to your cow back in the hut. The simple comfort of knowing who you are sleeping next to is a luxury you cannot afford on the road. So, there you have it. You survived the smell, the diet, the injustice, the plague, the war, and the journey. You've spent the better part of a year in the Middle Ages. You are perpetually hungry, legally enslaved, terrified of an eternal, burning hell, covered in bites, and you are 25 years old but look a weary 55. This is the great, ironic punchline of the medieval period. It was an age of breathtaking contradictions. They built the towering cathedrals, the magnificent Notre Dame, structures that defied gravity and inspired awe, yet they couldn't figure out how to put a pipe in the ground to move human waste out of the streets. They meticulously preserved the works of Aristotle, while simultaneously believing that carrying a dried toad around your neck would cure gout. They managed to fund vast crusades across continents, yet they let a third of their population die because they refused to wash their hands. In our last story, I asked if you could last 7 days in Victorian London. That was cute. That was a parlour game. The Victorian poor at least had the promise of modernity, steam engines, gaslighting, and eventual sanitation. The medieval peasant had nothing but toil and fear. The air you breathed was poison, the water you drank was poison, the medicine they gave you was poison, and the church used the threat of eternal damnation as psychological poison to keep you quiet. So, here is your real reality check. You couldn't survive 1 month. You wouldn't survive the first wave of dysentery. You wouldn't survive your first fever under the care of a barber surgeon wielding a dirty knife and a handful of leeches. Look around your modern room. You have climate control. You have running, clean water that you don't have to boil for hours. You have antibiotics that would be viewed as a literal miracle by the greatest minds of the 14th century. Your teeth are intact. Your floor is clean. You are safe from the feudal lord and the roving bandit. You are living like an emperor who lives longer, eats better, and is cleaner than Charlemagne or King Henry V ever dreamed of being. You complain about your internet speed. Your biggest problem is deciding what to order for dinner. Their biggest problem was survival. Take a deep, clean breath, dreamer. You are safe. The fear is gone. If you enjoyed this tour of historical misery, you absolute weirdo, please remember to like and subscribe to History Bedtime Stories. And do me a favor, when you walk past your medicine cabinet tomorrow, just give it a little hug. That little bottle of ibuprofen is the greatest scientific achievement this peasant ever wished for. Good night, and sweet nightmares.